lived on Earth for a known period of the past. We use the biological clock based on how DNA mutates over time.
For centuries, Mexico has been a crossroads of civilizations, migrations, and cultural change. But what if a simple DNA test could reveal a story stretching back thousands of years, long before the arrival of Europeans or the creation of modern borders? The genetic makeup of Mexicans is one of the most fascinating in the world, blending ancient indigenous roots with European and African ancestry. Today, scientists are uncovering remarkable connections that link Mexicans to populations across continents, revealing that the story of Mexican DNA is far richer than most people ever imagined. Shared DNA across Latin America. Mexico's genetic connections extend far beyond its modern borders. One of the most fascinating discoveries from recent DNA research is that Mexicans share remarkably close genetic ties with many other Latin American populations. These similarities are the result of thousands of years of migration, shared ancestry, colonization, and cultural exchange that began long before the first Europeans arrived in the Americas. Scientists believe the earliest indigenous peoples of North, Central, and South America descended from ancient populations that migrated into the continent thousands of years ago. As these early settlers spread across different regions, they developed distinct cultures, languages, and civilizations. Despite these differences, they retained many of the same genetic markers, creating lasting biological connections between indigenous groups throughout the Americas. This ancient shared ancestry explains why indigenous communities in countries such as Guatemala, Peru, and Colombia often have DNA that closely resembles that of many Mexicans. Although modern national borders separate these populations today, their ancestors lived and migrated across the continent long before those boundaries existed. Spanish colonization added another layer to this shared genetic history. Throughout Latin America, Spanish settlers intermarried with indigenous communities, while African ancestry was introduced during the colonial era through the transatlantic slave trade. Similar patterns of genetic mixing occurred across countries including Ecuador, Venezuela, Peru, and Colombia, producing populations with ancestry that closely mirrors that of modern Mexicans. Researchers continue to confirm these relationships through large-scale genomic studies, consistently finding strong genetic links among Latin American populations, especially those with higher levels of indigenous ancestry. Mexican Americans also demonstrate this close connection. Many families in Texas, California, Arizona, and New Mexico trace their roots to regions that were once part of Mexico, and generations of cross-border marriages have maintained these genetic ties. DNA testing regularly shows that Mexican Americans often share ancestry profiles nearly identical to those of people living in Mexico today. Together, these findings demonstrate that genetics reflects shared family history rather than political boundaries, preserving connections that span thousands of years. The Ancient Indigenous Foundation. To understand who shares the closest DNA with Mexicans, we have to go back thousands of years, long before the arrival of Spanish explorers. The oldest and largest component of Mexican DNA comes from the indigenous peoples who inhabited the region for millennia. These were not small or isolated communities, but highly advanced civilizations that built impressive cities, established organized governments, practiced sophisticated agriculture, and made remarkable achievements in astronomy, mathematics, architecture, and written language. Their innovations shaped the history of the Americas and left a lasting genetic legacy that remains strong today. Among the most influential indigenous groups were the Nahua, Maya, Zapotec, Mixtec, and Otomi peoples. Each occupied different regions of present-day Mexico and developed its own customs, traditions, and languages while sharing ancient ancestral roots. Their descendants continue to live across Mexico, preserving many aspects of their cultural heritage and carrying forward genetic lineages that stretch back thousands of years. Modern DNA studies consistently reveal that indigenous ancestry remains the dominant genetic influence for many Mexicans. Even individuals whose families have lived in urban areas for generations often discover that a significant portion of their ancestry traces directly to these ancient populations. Researchers studying mitochondrial DNA, inherited from mothers, and Y chromosome DNA, passed from fathers to sons, have found remarkable evidence of continuity between modern Mexicans and their indigenous ancestors. Spanish colonization changed everything. While indigenous ancestry forms the foundation of Mexican DNA, the arrival of the Spanish in the early 16th century marked the beginning of another major chapter in Mexico's genetic history. Spanish explorers, settlers, and colonists brought profound changes to the region, transforming its culture, language, religion, and population. Rather than replacing the indigenous peoples who already lived there, centuries of interaction led to widespread intermarriage between Europeans and native communities, creating a unique blend of ancestry that continues to define Mexico today. This mixing gave rise to the mestizo population, people of both indigenous and European descent. Over generations, mestizos became the majority of Mexico's population, making mixed ancestry one of the country's defining characteristics. Modern genetic studies show that most European DNA found in Mexicans can be traced back to Spain, reflecting the country's long colonial relationship with the Iberian Peninsula. However, the proportion of European ancestry varies across Mexico. Northern regions generally have higher levels of European DNA due to greater historical settlement by Spanish colonists, while southern states such as Oaxaca, Chiapas, and the Yucatan Peninsula retain much stronger indigenous genetic signatures. Mexico's genetic story became even more complex during the colonial era with the arrival of Africans through the transatlantic slave trade. Although African ancestry represents a smaller portion of the overall gene pool, its influence remains especially significant in coastal regions like Veracruz and Guerrero. Over time, African, indigenous, and European communities blended together, enriching Mexico's cultural and genetic heritage. Today, researchers continue to study how this diverse ancestry influences inherited traits, health, and disease risk. The combination of indigenous, European, and African roots has made Mexico one of the most genetically diverse nations in the Americas, reflecting centuries of shared history and human connection. Why there is no single Mexican DNA. Perhaps the biggest misconception about genetics is the belief that every population has a single, uniform DNA profile. In reality, Mexico is one of the most genetically diverse countries in the world. Its people are the product of thousands of years of migration, cultural exchange, and historical events, creating a rich genetic landscape that varies from region to region. There is no single Mexican DNA. Instead, ancestry depends greatly on where a person's family has lived for generations. Northern Mexico generally has a stronger European genetic influence because these regions experienced greater Spanish settlement during the colonial era. In contrast, southern states such as Oaxaca, Chiapas, and the Yucatan Peninsula have preserved much higher levels of indigenous ancestry. Many communities there have maintained their traditions and genetic heritage for thousands of years, making them some of the closest living descendants of Mexico's earliest inhabitants. The coastal regions tell yet another chapter of the story. States like Veracruz and Guerrero became important ports during the transatlantic slave trade, bringing African populations to New Spain. Over time, African, indigenous, and European communities intermarried, adding another important layer to Mexico's genetic diversity. Although African ancestry represents a smaller percentage of the overall population, it remains an essential part of Mexico's cultural and biological heritage. Because of these regional differences, there is no single answer to who shares the closest DNA with Mexicans. Some individuals have stronger genetic ties to indigenous peoples across Central and South America, while others show closer connections to Spain or a balanced mix of indigenous, European, and African ancestry. Modern DNA research continues to uncover these complex relationships while helping scientists better understand migration, evolution, and inherited health conditions. Ultimately, Mexico's DNA tells a story that spans continents and thousands of years. It reflects the meeting of ancient civilizations, European colonization, African heritage, and centuries of cultural exchange, reminding us that human history is one of constant movement, shared ancestry, and deep interconnectedness across generations. The question of who has the closest DNA to Mexicans has no single answer, because Mexican ancestry is one of the most diverse in the world. If you enjoyed uncovering the fascinating science behind Mexican DNA, be sure to like and subscribe for more incredible stories about history, ancestry, and the discoveries that continue to reshape our understanding of the human family.